Magistrate. It's written by a pastor. It's a great book. And it talks about your authority. It talks about the authority of what's called the lesser magistrate. Okay, the lesser magistrate. And the name of the book is very easy to read. Probably 100 pages, maybe. Doctrine of the lesser magistrate. And in it talks about the role of the lesser magistrate. Okay, so as a sheriff or as a law enforcement professional, certainly as somebody who's in charge of a lower level of government, right, you have extraordinary responsibilities and authorities, particularly authorities. And when you start to look into your laws, your local policies, your local regulations, I mean, the capability that you have to be able to solve the problems in your community. And like I tell people all the time, most Americans, and I say this sort of, using it as a metaphor because, sometimes people live on a ranch and there's not that much 50 feet from their door. But most people in this country, they don't care what's outside of about 50 feet from their door. They really don't. Most people just want to know that they can go out into their community, be safe, be protected. They can run down to the store, to the local 7-Eleven to get a gallon of milk and afford it, or a loaf of bread, or they can take their kids and it's normally a mom. It's normally a mom that she feels safe enough to take their kid out to the corner, and maybe there's a bus that picks their kid up. She puts her kid on a bus, and the kid goes off to some public school. Whatever's 50 feet from their door is what the majority of Americans really care about. And you know what? It's like something that I was taught as a kid. One of the things that my mother used to teach us was how to dial 911. Right? In the old, the old phones. Not even the push button. It was like, and the hand crank. And we'd have them. But the old, old rotaries, right? How to dial 911. Why? And she would sit there. I'm one of 9 kids. So she would sit there and she would, take us through it. And she'd say, why? Because when there's an emergency, if this house is on fire or something's happening. And so when we dial 911, at least when we used to dial 911, right? You trusted whoever it was that you were going to talk to, and you trusted that they were going to show up in as quick a period of time as they could to help you. Okay? I'm watching and I'm listening and I'm paying very close attention to all this Uvalde, Texas stuff. And I think that one of the things that we have done, and it's ugly. It's very ugly. But I actually feel bad for some of the law enforcement professionals that were part of something like that, because I think that what we've done is we have handcuffed our police forces. We have handcuffed, cops out there, and so the culture that's created is if you go and take a risk, right? If you go and take a risk, you might get sued. You're going to get fired, right? The culture that we are creating, right? To defund the police, the bashing of our cops. I mean, Patrick showed that picture up here of the summer of love, right? 2020, the summer of love. I mean, 33 police officers were killed, were murdered, 33. $4 billion in property damage, $4 billion. And I don't know of one investigation that's ongoing. Not one. I don't know of one. I don't know of any. I mean, maybe there's something out there and I just missed it. But so we have created a culture in this country where even our law enforcement professionals are afraid to do their jobs. They're afraid to do their jobs because they feel like the entire wrath is going to come on their heads, and they're going to be like one of the incidents down in Uvalde was a father who was also a police officer who, when he got to the site, he was going to charge inside, and he was actually, I guess he was tackled. They disarmed him, so his child's inside. His child ended up, I'm sorry, it was his wife who was the teacher. His wife who was the teacher. And his wife ended up dying. She got killed. She was killed. She was killed. They tackled him, took his weapon away, and they pulled him back. So I tell you this because we have a culture in this country that you know, the big they out there, and I'll talk about who some of the they are here in a sec. They are trying to change the culture. It's basically it's instilling a sense of fear into our society, so nobody will do anything. Yeah. Right? Nobody will do anything. I mean, you know, I'd go rhyme and verse, and I don't even, you know, I'm so past what they did to me. I'm not done going after those sons of guns. I'm going to continue to go after them. But it's like, you know, as a person who rose to the level that I rose to, it wasn't because, you know, all I was going to do was worry about my problems. You know, we have to solve problems. We have to figure out how to solve them. I was told a long time ago that, you know, it's like when you all, the whole thing about you get knocked down, you get back up again, right? That great song. So, you know, and I taught people this. I taught young sergeants this, young privates, young officers, and I would say, look, it's not that something bad happened to you, because believe me, you know, in the world of the military, particularly when you get into command positions, and you now have what we call, for those in the military or former military, you know, UCMJ authority, right? You have military justice that you can impose on them. You know, so it's not that you're going to do bad things or something bad is going to happen. But I would always try to find out about, well, what did you learn from it? And did you learn something from it? And can you recover? Because if you can recover, we've invested a lot in you, and I want to keep you. So did you learn something from it? Yeah. Okay, then learn from it. Don't make the same mistake again, and get out of my office, kind of, right? And go out there and do good. You would build such extraordinary loyalty, and you would also teach them something. Instead of ruining their career and busting them down or whatever and taking money, which is a negative. So that's what parts of our government are doing that to us right now. I call it the just us system, right? Just us, because it's just them. Mm-hmm. Right? Our justice system right now. I mean, I talked about states' rights, and I want you to really think about it. When you walk out of here, you start thinking about what are states' rights versus what are the things that the federal government is trying to continue to take from us, right? And then for those of you that are operating at a lower level, down at a county level, you start to look at what are the measures of authority and control that you have. Okay, what are the things that you can do as an individual? What is it that you can do? Because we cannot allow this beating down of the American citizenry in this country. We just can't allow this. We cannot have this. I mean, the federal government, every single place, you know, look at what they just did in Arizona. I was in touch with a state senator this morning because they quote unquote, there's an insurrection going on in Arizona, right? I mean, this is for real. For those that aren't paying, anybody here from Arizona? Well, in Arizona, a massive crowd beating down the windows, beating down the doors of the state legislature, who are in their session right now, and they had to abscond out of the area that they went to. They had to go to a hidden area to continue on to have their hearings to talk about fraudulent elections of all things. Okay. They're coming after us. They're coming after our rights. So who are they? Who are they? And I'm glad that gentleman talked about these sort of big organizations, these global organizations. By raise of hands, how many have heard the name Harari? Okay, good. So that word is getting out. Not bad. We're probably about maybe 20% of the room. Harari. I always use that name because that's a name that's very real. And look him up. Yuval Noah Harari. He's the chief advisor to the World Economic Forum and a guy by the name of Klaus Schwab. Okay? He's also an advisor, was an advisor to Barack Obama. Okay? Is an advisor to Bill Gates. Okay, the World Economic Forum. Again, look it up. And don't take my word for any of this. Go look at the last session that they had in Davos, Switzerland, okay, which they just finished about 2 weeks ago, and it's all online. They tell us exactly what it is that they are going to do. So these globalist organizations, and Patrick touched on some of this, talking through, this sort of incredible story, not just recent history back to 2015, but all the way back into the early part of the last, actually 2 decades ago, right? And we have people like Patrick. That's why I said at the beginning, it runs much deeper than that. It runs much deeper than that. So you look up people like Klaus Schwab, you look up people, like Dr. Harari, you look up the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the United Nations, the European Union, which is not a world organization, but trust me, they believe they are. Okay? All unelected. None of these people are elected. They're all sort of appointed. It's like a patronage system. But these are really serious people, and they've been at it since the early 1970s. Okay? So they've been at this since the early 1970s. In fact, since about 1970, between 71 and 73. So these are very real things. These are very real people. Go look at the latest Davos World Economic Forum that they held in Davos, Switzerland, about the beginning of this month. Go look at it. Google it. Look up all of their videos. Look at the words. Look at the things that they say. Because there is a sense of globalism when we talk about sort of one world authority, which is a total usurpation of our Constitution. Okay, it has zero to do with who we are as Americans. And so, who are we? We're the last bastion of freedom. Okay? In the world of there's something we call the Five Eyes community, and the intel has been written about quite a bit. I mean, when you have countries like Australia, and you have countries like New Zealand, you have countries like the United Kingdom, you have countries like Canada, and then the United States. Those are really the big English-speaking countries of the world. Well, in Australia, and I have some very close friends in Australia. Australia has internment camps. Canada has internment camps for people who don't get the COVID vaccine. So you go in there for a period of time for quarantine. And the restrictions on travel. New Zealand is pretty much gone. I don't know if New Zealand will recover. I don't think that they'll recover. I feel like it's unrecoverable. Australia has a potential because there are some politicians down there who are very bold, one of which is not a politician, a former military guy by the name of Vossi, and he's looking to maybe run in this next election if they have it. Canada, everybody has seen what's going on in Canada, right? With Trudeau and their reaction to the truckers' convoy. The majority of those truckers, it had nothing to do with vaccinations. Majority of them said we got vaccinated. It had to do with their rights as individuals. Now remember, the United States Constitution doesn't exist in these other places. These people made decisions. These countries made decisions. Are they democracies? They're a form of democracy, but they're not like us. Okay, generally, they are a type of republic, right? But they don't have that constitution. They don't have that tricameral system of government like we have in our country, which is a judiciary, a legislative branch, and an executive branch. And thank God that 250 years ago, whatever you want to think of these founders, that they had the vision to say, we're going to put into place a series of checks and balances. Well, guess what, sheriffs, for those that are in here? You're a check. You're a check. You have the ability to check, like when you're playing chess, right? Check, check, check. And you keep people on. In fact, if you know anything about chess, once you start to check somebody, don't give up. Just keep going after them. Keep going after them. Check them until you trap them into their own mess. Okay? We have that tricameral system so we can put checks on the overreach of other parts of our government. And back to the Supreme Court decision yesterday, we're talking 50 years. 50 years this has been. And many of the articles from the media, the other thing that Patrick showed, many of the articles that are out today and on some of the left media, they're talking about this constitutional right that was just usurped, that was just removed. There was never a constitutional right. And it was never. So the media is beating up to the psyche of America right now, certainly to those that are going to listen to them, that this was a constitutional right that you had and it's being taken away from you. It was never a constitutional right. Okay? Back to states' rights. Back to what you can do. One of the things, and it's a leadership principle, and I'm going to stop in a second here, and I'm going to just throw it out. I'll maybe take a question or two, because I know Patrick's going to come up, and we're going to maybe talk a little bit about it. But one of the things that I think is really important, and it gets back to, and it's a leadership class that I used to give, or I used to talk to people about, and there's things that when somebody would come into me and say, I got this problem, or they were complaining about something, and I would say, well, what is it that you can control? What do you do? What's your job? And they would tell me, I knew what it was, and they'd tell me, and I'd say, okay, so what are you doing about your job? What are you doing to fix your problem? Because all you're doing is you're making it my problem. Right? So what is it that you can control? Can you control getting your rear end up in time to get to work on time? Yes. Okay, then make sure that you're at work on time all the time, right? I mean, what are the things that you can control? The things that you cannot control, and this is the sentiment of many Americans in the country right now. Many Americans in this country today, they complain about Washington, D.C. And many complain about their own state capital, whether it's Tallahassee or some other state capital. And they complain about it, and that's okay, you can complain. But when they complain and they're complaining, I ask them, well, what are you going to do about it? And they go, well, I really can't do it. Well, they can go vote, okay, so go vote for some representative or some senator, or maybe you go vote for a president on a presidency. So you can do that. That's a means of how you can control that. But most Americans feel like things are just so out of control, and they are. So I always say, well, what is it that you can control? Where do you live? What is most important for you 50 feet from your door? Okay, what's most important 50 feet from your door? And I love the phrase, local action has a national impact. Local action equals a national impact. So what are you doing locally? What are you doing locally? Don't give a dime to some group up there. Go find somebody that you like. If you like your sheriff, because you believe what the sheriff's doing, go help the sheriff. Get involved in the campaign. If you like some local representative, control the things that you can control and let others. That doesn't mean you can't complain. I'm not going to tell people don't complain. I think that's fine. It lets you out some, lets you get negative energy out of you. But you got to get up there and you got to decide today, what are the things that you can control, and then take control of those things. Take control of those things. The destiny of America is going to be decided upon whatever path you choose to take when you leave this room. Okay? Not what you did before. And it doesn't mean that what you did before was necessarily wrong. Frankly, and now I'm talking to all of America. Something has not been working. Something is not working in our country. Alabama, anybody from Alabama? Woo! Yeah, so Alabama, okay? This is not a good story. So Alabama, I'm on it, but you need to hear this. Okay? Alabama just had its primaries. This is the Republican side, okay? The Democrats don't have primaries. They just say you're going to run. Okay? But so the Republicans just did a primary in Alabama. Primary. Okay? And then they just did the runoff, because they just had a runoff, because particularly for one of the Senate seats. And I'm paying attention to all these different primaries around the country. Alabama's turnout, it's embarrassing. Alabama's turnout for the primaries was 18%.
What?
18%.
Oh, hell no.
So people that can, and that's now, that's in a period of time where our country is at risk. So for somebody to tell me, well, I don't do that political thing, or that's not my thing, it's your thing. It's your thing. Because guess what? It's your children or your grandchildren's thing. Okay? So, for those of you that can, try to get a copy of that book, The Doctrine of the Lesser Magistrate. It's really fascinating. It's fascinating because if you read it and you begin to think about who am I? Who am I in my role at whatever level that I'm at, particularly down in a law enforcement role? We are all lesser magistrates. We are all lesser magistrates. Our founders, our key documents, they came out of documents dating back to the Bible. Okay, and then they were built upon that. So, when you read the diaries and the Federalist Papers of our founders, like 75% of the Constitution was built upon the Bible. It's incredible. I mean, it's just incredible. But you got to understand that. Our problem is not enough people in this country really understand our Constitution. I carry one around only because it's unbelievable. It's like you think this Constitution is going to be this big fat book that you put by your bed to go to sleep. This is it. Inside here is also the Declaration of Independence. And that Declaration of Independence, it's like 4 pages. It takes you about 3 minutes to read. Right? I mean, it's, we're not even teaching our kids this because the other side, this globalist creep into our federal government and the takeover of our federal government and the levers of power in our country, which is very real. They don't want our kids to learn this. They don't want our kids to learn this. So anyway, okay. So I think we're going to take a couple of questions. Chris, okay. Thank you.
What do you think is a good path to hold these folks accountable? The media themselves.
Just turn the TV off. Again, the average reader, okay, an average person, when they look at it, this is all hard facts, right? The majority of people, when they get an article, they read the first 2 paragraphs, and then they decide whether or not they're going to read anymore, and then they just throw it away, right? All of us are on these kinds of things. People are watching, like we would have, Huntley Brinkley or whatever. Somebody would go home and you'd sit down and, your father would tell you to sit your rear end down and eat dinner, and then you go watch the TV. All that's changed. It's changed. I mean, CNN is failing, and it isn't a failed organization. Because people have turned it off. So, turn it off.
What are the chances of the federal election to be postponed? Is the question.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. What are the chances of the November election to be postponed, delayed, or canceled? Would be the way I state it. And so it's very real. It's very real. Wow. And I'll tell you, there's a fascinating. I'll see if I can find the article. The title of the article here, right quick. It's very real. So Biden is hiding his plan to rig the 2022 midterm elections, and it's in the Federalist. Federalist is a very good place to read. They do some really unbiased sort of writing, and the Federalist Society is generally the one where we get names to pick justices of the Supreme Court, both sides. Okay, the Federalist Society. So it's fascinating, and the way that the author states, he says the White House is refusing to share details about its coordinated efforts to engage in a federal takeover of the election administration. Okay, this is written by Molly Hemingway. Anybody ever watch Molly Hemingway? And it was written on June 23rd. June 23rd. So you can Google Molly Hemingway and the Federalist Papers, or the Federalist. Sorry, the Federalist. And the date is June 23rd. It's well worth the read because that's exactly what she addresses. And so, is the federal government considering taking over our election system, which is not in the Constitution? I already addressed that. So the answer to that is absolutely they are.
Next question, General. Knowing what we know now regarding the rigged election, what recommendations would you make now in order to stop the next election from being rigged?
The voter, it turns out that to stuff the ballot box, you have to stuff the voter rolls beforehand. So the voter rolls turn out to be the key to this. The different stories you're hearing about machines, about mules, about paper, all that's true and it all fits together, but it only works when they first stuff the voter rolls. You're going to find out that there's shocking slop in that system. In fact, there's 31 states take part in ERIC. ERIC is a system funded by Soros that they report the states all hook up to, so when somebody moves from Arizona to Missouri, it's supposed to register and send Arizona a message.
So it's ERIC, E-R-I-C, ERIC. It's an acronym, and 31 states have this system.
It turns out what detailed analysis of Arizona has revealed is they just use the system. If 100 people move this month from Arizona to other states, and ERIC reports back to them, okay, these 100 people have left Arizona, they don't get scrubbed from the voter rolls. They get put on a list in the pocket of the crooked election officials, and now they know those 100 people are votes that they can vote. Not once have they ever, they're members of ERIC, but not once did they ever scrub the rolls with the information. They've just used it to accumulate the list of the votes that they can submit. So this has been, our enemies have targeted our election systems and people. I'm sorry to say, I think that there's so much corruption in the election. And it only makes sense. You can take over our country through this.
I mean, get involved in these voter rolls and who's registered. You know how many, find out how many dead people are registered to vote. I mean, if there's one and that person votes, that's a felony, number one, and it's also fraud. So we shouldn't accept, like the media says, well, it's a marginal amount of fraud.
It's still fraud.
So next question.
One more question, and then we'll take smoke. We want to keep moving.
Okay, one more question regarding from the intel perspective. What are the odds of being able to scrap Dominion and ESS machines going forward?
So one county in Nevada, I think it's Nye County, Nevada. They voted to get rid of all the machines, to get rid of everything, basically go to one day of voting. You know, the way it's sort of always been done, with the exception of absentee ballots. You know, and I have voted absentee because of my time in the military, which is actually a pretty good system. It's not perfect. Absentee when you're away, and for people who are invalids, they vote absentee. So a county was able to do that. The counties have the authority. That's why we elect something called county commissioners, right? Yes. And we elect county election commissioners. So why do we do that? Because that's the lowest level of authority for running an election. A county can come in and say, we're going to go and we're going to scrub all the election data and we're going to run our election like this. And the federal government, like I said at the beginning, when the federal government comes down and they go, well, here's some money. You want the money? And guess what a lot of elected officials do, and some non-elected, who are just bureaucrats. They take that money and they put it in their pocket and they just keep their mouths shut and they keep going. There's so much corruption. So get involved. Like if you didn't ever think about running, go run. I'm telling people to run for school board.
Last question is regarding the Convention of States, Article 5. What are your thoughts on using that as a vehicle to rein in the federal government?
And here's my only concern about Convention of States, and that is there will be a block. There will be a big block because they'll get paid and they'll show up if there was a Convention of States, and they will try to eliminate the Second Amendment.
If I may, I've been
So
working.
I don't not believe in it. I'm just telling you, you go there, believe me, you can walk out of there and all of a sudden you go, oh, we called for it, and next thing you know, you don't have the Second Amendment anymore.
I had the actual distinct pleasure to work with the Balanced Budget Amendment team for 3 years before I got involved with the FRA. And after we digitized the library, the Congressional Library, we've discovered there were 41 applications for the Balanced Budget Amendment alone. There's 34 applications, that's the key number, bear in mind, for right to life, that's been sitting there on file. So what we have here is what I call a constitutional crisis, because Congress has failed to call or to accept or do their obligatory responsibility to count those applications. They haven't done that, so in order to get those pushed through, we're going to have to sue Congress for not doing their job. So,
Sue them or get them out of office.
I'm with you.
Scalia, just so you know, Scalia was always of the point of view that a convention of states would be opening Pandora's box, and we would walk out with the United Socialist States of America.
Wow. Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you. Big hand for General Flynn!
This is yesterday's decision. It's actually been in play since last summer, and they took a couple of cases, one of which came out of Texas, and the main one came out of Mississippi. That's the Dobbs case out of Mississippi. But what the Supreme Court did was they consolidated a couple of cases that they decide. So for those that don't understand, when the Supreme Court, damn near every day, but every month, the Supreme Court goes through whether or not they're going to accept cases. And they get sometimes they get thousands of cases presented to them, and they rifle through them and they decide which ones they are going to choose. So they don't take just any old cases. And what they do is they make decisions about those cases, and in some cases, like they did with this one, they consolidated a couple of state-level cases. This is very important because even though it overturned a major decision that was, taken back in 1973, the real result of yesterday was a return, as Justice Thomas said. If you read their decisions, because each one of the judges writes something about it. There's a dissent. I'm only a portion of the way through the dissent, but I am through most of Alito and most of Clarence Thomas's decisions, which are really, they're stark, they're amazing, because it really doesn't have to do necessarily with the broader strategic issue. It has everything to do with what you just heard. It has everything to do with our Constitution. When they threw this back, when the Supreme Court of the United States, in yesterday's decision, and they made a couple of other decisions about, gun laws in New York, right? Voter identification in North Carolina. But when they threw this particular decision back, it wasn't just about the right to life. It was about what the founders of this country decided when they created this country, and they argued for the better part of almost 20 years. And of course, we go into a war, and then for another 10, 11 years, we continue to argue until we ratify our Constitution. So the vision of the original founders of this country, they did not give the federal government that many things to do. They did not. And in fact, all of the states at the time, the 13 states, 4 million people, 4 million residents of the United States of America at that time, what they did, they all went in there, all the representatives that went in there and argued for the way the Constitution was created, they went in there and they argued for states' rights. States' rights. So for example, This decision shows constitutionally that the right to life is a state's issue. It's a state's issue. So where you're going to see all of the riots, the rioters are like in Los Angeles. There's rioters in Los Angeles. Well, guess what? Los Angeles is still legal to have an abortion. Or California is still legal to have an abortion. So they're going to riot in cities that already allow it, and they're going to destroy, cities and parts of states that already allow it. So this is a states' rights issue. And that's the brilliance, not so much of a guy like Clarence Thomas, even though he's incredibly brilliant, and Alito, and some of the other newer justices, but this is a states' rights issue. Well, guess what? If you look at the Constitution and you say, because I'm now talking to you in this audience, okay, for those that are in the law enforcement community, you look at the Constitution and you say, okay, well, what other rights do we have are either individual rights or states' rights? And I can tell you, one of the big ones is elections. Elections are not it's not something that the federal government weighs in on. They should not weigh in on. What they have done is they have incredibly, in an incredible way, they have overreached into our election system and our election process. And you know how they do it? They do it with money. They do it with your money, my money. Right? They take taxpayers' dollars and they go, well, if you take this, if you take this kid, right, give him candy to a kid, right? Give him it's unbelievable. It's a lure for those fishermen. It's a lure to grab hold. And then they give some to the states, and in some cases they flow it all the way down to the county level. In fact, in most cases, I can tell you, it's probably 80 to 90% every county in this country is receiving some type of federal dollars to be able to run their elections. You don't need to accept it. States' rights. That's a big part of it. If I were the governor of a state, and I got that decision yesterday, I would take that decision and I would start to just waive it as with all of the other states' rights that I know are constitutional. Because guess what another state's right is? It's a big one. Somebody yelled it out earlier that there was 40 million. And we were talking about, one of the gentlemen that was zoomed in here earlier talking about illegals crossing our border, right? Well, guess what is a state right? Border security. Border security. The only responsibility for the federal government for border security is our contiguous borders with foreign powers or foreign entities. Okay? Meaning our neighbors to the north in Canada and our neighbors to the south in Mexico. The federal government has responsibility to protect those borders during a time of war. If you go back to the Mexican-American War, okay, prior to the Civil War, there was a responsibility there. And they actually brought and weighed in for that responsibility and brought resources, brought militia. They moved forces down there. States have the responsibility for their sovereignty of their borders. Okay, so for example, the number one state in this country right now that has fentanyl deaths, you'd think it'd be like New Mexico or maybe Texas, and fentanyl's only coming through the southern border. Okay, or maybe it's California, maybe it's Arizona, it's Ohio. What? Ohio, the number one state in this country for fentanyl deaths is Ohio, a non-contiguous to any foreign power state. The founding fathers, when they all got us together, when they got everybody together, and because all of the states, every single state at that time, all the 13 colonies, and then they turned into states, all the representatives went in there and they said, hey, in fact, do you know that all of the 13 colonies had their own currency? They all had their own currency. They all had their own currency too. So they came in there and they said, we want to protect our own borders. And so that was a big deal. That was a big deal. States' rights. It's built into the Constitution. Immigration is not addressed in the Constitution. Naturalization is addressed in the Constitution. Okay, to become a naturalized U.S. citizen, that's addressed in the Constitution, and then that has evolved over time as to how you do it. But immigration isn't addressed in the Constitution. What's addressed in the Constitution is the security of the borders, and the states have a far greater responsibility and a constitutional responsibility. That's why every single state created their own constitution. Every single state has their own constitution. States' rights. So I'm sort of walking the dog here with you because there are other constitutional responsibilities that only states have. And then you take it down to another level, okay? You take it down to the county level. Because I'm kind of walking the dog backwards from where the founding fathers actually created this country. They created it from the bottom up. They looked at individuals and they worked their way to the top. And then they at the end of the day, they gave the federal government only a few things to do. They didn't give them that many things to do. What has happened and why we are where we are is because this country has flipped itself and allowed ourselves to be flipped on its head. Because when you go down to like the county level, okay, for those that are sheriffs here and run a particular county, you have extraordinary authority. And I always, and most of the time, if I meet sheriffs individually, I usually ask them, so for this group, I always ask, have you ever heard of the book, The Doctrine of the Lesser Magistrate?